Strange, strange, strange.
The lights go down, but not all the way. There is always a single bulb left burning somewhere in the theatre. A ghost light. A bare bulb on a stand at center stage, meant to keep people from falling into the orchestra pit in the dark. That's the official reason. The practical one. But in theatre, nothing stays practical for long. Because once the audience leaves and the doors are locked, that light isn't just for safety. It's for whatever might still be there. Los Angeles is full of places like this. Theaters built for dreams, for spectacle, for illusion. Palaces of velvet and gold leaf where people came to see stories unfold under artificial stars. Places where actors lived entire lives under stage lights, where musicians played to rooms so full the walls seemed to breathe with them. Places where careers were made, where reputations were destroyed, where people stood in the spotlight and believed, if only for a moment, that they would never be forgotten. And then the show ended. But theaters don't empty the way other places do. Not really. They hold on to things. Sound lingers. Footsteps echo long after the last person has gone. Curtains close, but something stays behind them. The architecture itself seems to remember. Every laugh, every gasp, every line delivered into the dark. In Los Angeles, those memories stack up. Decades of them. Silent film premieres. Vaudeville acts. Movie palaces packed with strangers sitting shoulder to shoulder, breathing in the same darkness. Hollywood royalty moving through backstage corridors, leaving traces that never quite fade. And sometimes, when the building is quiet enough, those traces start to move. A voice, where there shouldn't be one. A figure crossing a stage that no one booked. Music, drifting out of a room that's been locked for years. Theaters were built to create illusions. But what happens when the illusion doesn't stop? When the audience is gone, and the performers are long dead? And something is still taking the stage? This is strange, and we're looking at the haunted theaters of Los Angeles. Chapter 1. The Hollywood Pantages Theatre. The Hollywood Pantages Theatre was never meant to be subtle. When it opened in 1930, it arrived like a declaration. A towering Art Deco palace in the heart of Hollywood, built at the exact moment the film industry was shifting from silent pictures to sound. It was opulence on purpose. Marble, gold, sweeping staircases, and a ceiling that seemed designed to make every person who entered feel small in the presence of something larger than themselves. This was where Hollywood gathered to see itself. Premieres. Stars. Applause that rolled through the building like weather. The kind of place where a performer could walk onto the stage and feel the weight of expectation settle over them like a second skin. And for a while, that energy never really stopped. Even when the audience went home, the building held on to it. That's where the stories begin. Staff have long reported that the Pantages doesn't go quiet the way it should. Not completely. Even late at night, when the theater is empty, there are sounds that don't belong to an empty building. Footsteps in the balcony. Doors that open and close without anyone near them. Voices that drift just at the edge of hearing, as if someone is rehearsing a line that no one else remembers. And then there's the singing. More than one employee has described hearing a woman's voice somewhere in the house. Not loud. Not theatrical. Just present. A soft, steady melody that seems to move through the space, impossible to locate. By the time anyone tries to follow it, it's already gone. The most common explanation ties the voice to a story from 1932. A woman, attending a show, reportedly fell from the mezzanine and died inside the theater. In some versions, it was an accident. In others, something darker. The details shift depending on who tells it, but the ending stays the same. She never really left. But she isn't alone. Another presence is often linked to Howard Hughes, who was known to spend time in the theatre during its early years. His connection to the Pantages isn't as dramatic as some of his other Hollywood haunts, but his name comes up often enough to stick. People claim to feel watched in certain parts of the building, particularly in areas where Hughes was known to sit, as if someone is still observing the performance, long after the curtain has fallen. And then there is Alexander Pantages himself. The man who built the theatre. The one who gave it his name. Some believe he never gave it up. Reports describe a presence backstage. A figure glimpsed in reflections, or just out of direct sight. Not threatening. Not even particularly active. Just there. As if checking in. As if making sure the show is still worthy of the space he created. None of these stories have proof. Not in the way people usually mean it. No recordings that settle the question. No single moment that confirms everything. But the stories persist. They pass from one employee to another. From stagehands to ushers to performers who swear they felt something they couldn't explain. And like most theatre traditions, once they take hold, they become part of the building itself. There is a reason the ghost light stays on. Not just to keep people from falling in the dark, but as a kind of acknowledgement. A quiet agreement between the living and whatever else might still be sharing the space. Because at the Pantages, the show didn't end in 1930. It just changed audiences. Chapter 2: The Avalon Hollywood. The Avalon Hollywood has never really settled on a single identity. It opened in 1927 as a Grand Hollywood Theatre, part of a city that was still inventing itself in real time. Back then, the building was designed for spectacle, live performances, film screenings, and a stage meant to hold attention and never let it go. Over the decades, it transformed again and again, shifting from theatre to concert venue to nightclub, reinvented for new generations, new sounds, and new crowds. But the building itself never changed as much as people think. Underneath the lighting rigs and sound systems, behind the DJs and the crowds pressed shoulder to shoulder, the bones of the original theatre remain. The stage is still there, along with the sightlines, the hidden corridors, and the forgotten rooms that were never meant to be seen by the audience. Those are the spaces where the stories begin. Employees have reported that the Avalon doesn't empty cleanly. Even after closing, when the music is cut and the last patrons have been ushered out into the Hollywood night, something lingers. Not just the echo of bass in the walls, but something quieter and more deliberate. One of the oldest stories is about the piano. There is no permanent piano in the building now, but multiple staff members have claimed to hear one late at night. Not random notes or the kind of noise a building might make when it settles, but actual playing, structured and melodic, as if someone is practicing alone in a room that no longer exists. When anyone goes looking for the source, the sound stops completely, leaving behind only the silence of an empty space that should not have been making music at all. Another recurring presence is less subtle, though no more explainable. Witnesses speak of a couple seen moving together along the edges of the space, sometimes near the balcony and sometimes crossing the back of the room. They are not seen clearly or often, but often enough that the story persists. They do not interact with anyone and do not acknowledge the living. Instead, they appear to be repeating something, a movement or a path, as if the building has preserved a moment and refuses to let it go. The details vary depending on who tells the story. Some describe older clothing, while others say the figures look indistinct, more like shadows trying to take shape. But the dynamic remains consistent. Two people moving together, detached from everything else happening around them. Performers and staff have also described a more subtle phenomenon, something harder to define but no less unsettling. There are moments when the room feels wrong, not dangerous, but occupied in a way that doesn't match the number of people present. A shift in the air, a sense that the crowd is not the only audience. It is easy to dismiss these experiences in a place like the Avalon. The environment itself invites confusion, built on loud music, flashing lights, and constant motion. It is the kind of place where the brain fills in gaps, where perception can be distorted by sheer sensory overload. But the experiences that linger are not the ones that happen during the chaos. They are the ones that happen after. When the music cuts out, when the lights come up, and when the building exhales and becomes what it used to be, something else seems to take over. In that quiet, the Avalon stops being a nightclub and becomes a theatre again, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. The sense of performance remains, as if the space itself is unwilling to let go of what it was built to do. And somewhere in that silence, something keeps playing, a melody with no instrument, a dance with no audience, a performance that never truly ended. Chapter 3: The Palace Theatre. The Palace Theatre predates Hollywood as most people imagine it. Opened in 1911 as part of the Orpheum vaudeville circuit, it was built for live performance at a time when film was still a novelty and the stage was everything. This was a working theatre in the purest sense, a place where performers moved in and out constantly, where acts changed nightly, and where the line between rehearsal and performance was often blurred. The building was designed to hold that kind of energy, to absorb it and reflect it back. Even now, more than a century later, it still feels like a place that expects something to happen at any moment. Unlike some of the more famous Hollywood venues, the Palace carries its history in a quieter way. It sits on Broadway, part of a stretch once packed with theaters that operated almost continuously in the early 20th century. The audience is gone now, or at least diminished, and the neighborhood has changed around it. But inside, very little feels disconnected from what it was. The stage remains intact. The balconies rise in the same steep tiers. The backstage areas still form a maze of narrow corridors and dressing rooms that seem to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. It is the kind of place where sound travels strangely, where a single movement can echo in ways that make it difficult to tell where it began. That disorientation is where the first stories take hold. Staff and visitors have reported seeing a figure crossing the stage when the theatre is otherwise empty. The description is consistent enough to stick: a woman in white lace, moving at a steady, unhurried pace from one side of the stage to the other. She does not acknowledge anyone who sees her. She does not stop. She simply reaches the wings and disappears, as if passing through a boundary that no longer exists for her. Attempts to follow her have never produced anything. By the time anyone reaches the stage, there is no one there. The visual sightings are only part of it. There are also reports of being touched when no one else is nearby, of the distinct sensation of someone brushing past in a corridor that should be empty. Doors open and close on their own, sometimes slowly, sometimes with enough force to draw attention from across the building. Music has been heard in distant rooms, faint and indistinct, like an echo of a rehearsal that ended decades ago. None of these events are dramatic on their own, but taken together they form a pattern that is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Part of what gives these stories their weight is the nature of the palace itself. Vaudeville theaters were transient spaces, built around constant turnover. Performers arrived, performed, and left, often within the span of a single day. There was no long-term attachment, no single identity that defined the building. Instead, it became a repository for hundreds, possibly thousands, of brief, intense presences. Each act brought its own energy, its own audience, its own emotional imprint. Over time, those layers built on top of one another, creating a space that feels less like a single story and more like an accumulation of them. That accumulation is what people seem to encounter now. Not necessarily a single ghost with a clear origin, but fragments. Moments that repeat without context. Movements that no longer connect to the people who made them. The woman in white may be one of those fragments, or she may be something more specific that has simply lost its history. The building does not offer explanations. It only presents the experience. In a theatre like the Palace, that may be the most unsettling part. It was designed for performance, for clarity, for the direct exchange between performer and audience. What remains now feels like a performance without either. Actions without intention. Presence without identity. The stage is still there, still waiting, but whatever crosses it no longer belongs to the world that built it. Chapter 4: The Hollywood Pacific Theatre. The Hollywood Pacific Theatre sits on Hollywood Boulevard like something paused mid-sentence. Opened in 1928 as the Warner Brothers. Hollywood Theatre, it was designed as a premiere house, a place where the industry could gather and watch itself projected larger than life. The exterior still carries that promise, ornate and deliberate, a facade built to suggest permanence. But the interior tells a different story. Closed for decades, largely untouched, it exists in a kind of suspended state, caught between what it was and whatever it might become. That in-between condition is part of what fuels its reputation. Unlike active theaters, where sound and movement can explain away almost anything, the Hollywood Pacific is defined by absence. No crowds. No performances. No steady human presence to overwrite the smaller details. When something happens there is nothing to mask it, nothing to absorb it into the noise of normal activity. The building is quiet enough that every sound feels intentional. People who have spent time inside describe that quiet as uneasy. Not simply the stillness of an empty structure, but something more attentive, as if the space is aware of being occupied. Footsteps are one of the most commonly reported phenomena. Not echoes or distant traffic bleeding through the walls, but distinct steps, measured and deliberate, moving through areas where no one else is present. They are often described as coming from the upper levels, crossing the balcony, or descending staircases that should be empty. By the time anyone tries to follow them, they stop. There are also reports of voices, though they rarely resolve into anything intelligible. Fragments of speech, the suggestion of conversation, the kind of low murmur you might expect from an audience settling into their seats. In an active theater, it would be background noise. In a closed one, it stands out. The impression is not of a single speaker, but of multiple presences overlapping, none of them fully distinct. It creates the sense of a crowd that is no longer there but has not entirely dissipated. Visual encounters are less common but more striking. Some have described glimpsing figures in the balcony, shapes that appear briefly and then vanish when looked at directly. Others report movement in peripheral vision, something crossing a doorway or standing at the edge of a corridor, only to disappear when attention shifts. These experiences are difficult to verify and easy to dismiss individually, but they follow a pattern consistent enough to be noted by those familiar with the building. What makes the Hollywood Pacific different from the others is its stillness. The Pantages hums with activity, the Avalon transforms itself nightly, the Palace retains the rhythm of performance. The Hollywood Pacific has none of that. It is a theater without a present tense. Everything that happens there feels displaced, as if it belongs to a time that is no longer accessible but continues to assert itself anyway. That sense of displacement may be the source of its hauntings. A premiere house would have held some of the most important moments in early Hollywood history: openings, debuts, gatherings of people whose lives revolved around performance and image. Those moments were designed to be seen, to be remembered. In a building that now stands empty, the idea that something of that visibility remains is difficult to ignore. Not as a conscious presence, perhaps, but as a kind of residue that refuses to settle. Inside the Hollywood Pacific, the stage is still there, though it has not been used in years. The seats remain, though no one sits in them. The architecture continues to suggest an audience, even when none exists. And in that contradiction, the building seems to generate its own activity. Sounds without sources. Movements without bodies. The suggestion of attention without anyone there to give it. It is not the most famous haunted theater in Los Angeles, but it may be the most unresolved. A place that has not decided whether it is finished, and in that uncertainty, continues to behave as though the show might begin again at any moment. Chapter 5: The Silent Movie Theater. The silent movie theater was built for ghosts long before anyone called it haunted. Opened in 1942 by John and Dorothy Hampton, it was never meant to follow the rest of Hollywood. While the industry moved forward into sound, spectacle, and scale, the Hamptons turned backward. They dedicated the space entirely to silent film, screening old reels in a time when most theaters had already abandoned them. It was an act of preservation, but also something closer to devotion. The past wasn't just remembered there. It was replayed over and over again, in the dark. That alone would be enough to give the building a strange atmosphere. A theater built to resurrect lost performances, to project long-dead actors back onto a screen, night after night. But the history of the space didn't stop there, and it didn't stay quiet. In 1997, the theater became the site of a murder. Lawrence Austin, who had taken over operations and was working to revive the theater, was shot and killed in his office. The crime was tied to disputes over ownership and money, a mundane motive in a place that felt anything but mundane. The violence was abrupt, contained, and deeply out of place against the theatre's carefully curated nostalgia. But it changed the building. After that, the past it projected onto the screen had competition from something much closer, something that had happened within its own walls. The stories that follow are tied as much to that moment as to the earlier decades. Staff and visitors have reported a presence in the office where Austin was killed. Not a constant one, but recurring enough to establish a pattern. Doors that should be closed are found open. Objects are moved slightly out of place. There is the distinct sense, at times, that someone is standing just outside the room, waiting, though no one is ever there when the door is opened. Elsewhere in the theatre, the experiences are less specific but no less unsettling. People have described hearing footsteps when the building is otherwise empty, moving across the floor in a way that suggests purpose rather than accident. There are moments when the projection booth seems occupied, when the faint mechanical sounds of equipment can be heard even when nothing is running. In a space built around film, those sounds carry a particular weight. The idea that something might still be operating the machinery, still running the show, fits too easily. Visual encounters are rare but consistent in tone. Figures glimpsed at the edge of vision, reflections that do not quite match what is in front of them, shadows that appear to move independently of any visible source. None of these moments last long enough to be confirmed, but they linger long enough to be remembered. What sets the silent movie theatre apart from the others is the layering of its history. Most haunted theatres are tied to performance, to the idea that something of the stage remains active after the performers are gone. Here, the haunting is doubled. There is the older layer, the silent films themselves, looping images of people who lived and died nearly a century ago. And then there is the more recent violence, the intrusion of something final and irreversible into a space built on repetition. Those two forces don't resolve. They sit alongside each other, uneasily. The flicker of black and white images on a screen. The memory of a gunshot in a quiet office. One is cyclical, endlessly repeating. The other is fixed, a single moment that cannot be undone. In a theatre devoted to the past, that distinction matters. Because film allows people to return, to be seen again and again as if they never left. But the building itself remembers something else, something that cannot be replayed or softened by time. And somewhere between those two realities, the theatre continues to operate. The projector runs. The images flicker. The room fills with shadows that look almost like people. And sometimes, it feels like one of them is real. Final chapter, the lights stay on. Los Angeles was built on illusion, but its theatres were built to hold it. Not just the performances, not just the films, not just the carefully constructed images that flickered across screens or played out under stage lights, but the feeling of being watched and of watching something that mattered. These were places designed for attention, for presence, for the exchange between performer and audience. And once that kind of energy fills a space, it doesn't leave easily. The Hollywood Pantages theatre still carries its voices, its footsteps, its quiet singing in the dark. The Avalon Hollywood continues to shift between identities, never quite shedding what it used to be, its music echoing long after the speakers go silent. The Palace Theatre holds on to fragments of motion, a figure crossing a stage that no longer belongs to her. The Hollywood Pacific Theatre remains suspended, its silence filled with something that feels like an audience that never left. And the silent movie theatre continues to project the past while holding something darker just beneath it. Each of these places tells a different version of the same story. Not of ghosts in the traditional sense, but of persistence. Of moments that refuse to end. Of spaces that were built for repetition and memory, and that may have taken that purpose more literally than anyone intended. And they are not alone. The Orpheum Theatre still draws reports of movement in its balconies and unseen presences backstage, as if the sheer volume of performers who passed through it left something behind. The $1 Million Theatre, one of the oldest of the great movie palaces, carries stories of apparitions and unexplained activity in its upper levels, tied to a past that refuses to stay quiet. Even the Los Angeles Theatre, perhaps the most opulent of them all, has its own reputation among those who work there, a sense that the grandeur was never entirely emptied out. Taken together, they form a kind of network. Not connected in any literal way, but linked by purpose. These are all places where people came to see and to be seen, where attention was focused and amplified, where emotion was manufactured and shared on a massive scale. If any kind of experience were going to leave a trace, it would be here. And maybe that's what a haunting is in a place like this. Not a single spirit, not a clear identity, but an accumulation. A layering of presence so dense that it begins to act on its own. A building remembering what it was built to do, long after the people who gave it that purpose are gone. Theaters were never meant to go dark. Even now, in many of them, the ghost light still burns at center stage. A single bulb, left on through the night. Officially, it's there for safety, to keep someone from stepping into the void in the dark. But traditions don't survive that long without meaning something more. Because in a city like Los Angeles, where illusion is the foundation, there is always the possibility that something is still performing. That something is still watching. And that when the lights go down, the show doesn't end. It just changes who it's for. Next time on strAInge, we're stepping out of the theaters and into the sky over Los Angeles, where, in 1942, something appeared above the city and refused to be explained. The searchlights locked on. The anti-aircraft guns opened fire. And whatever was up there did not go down. We're reliving the story of the Battle of Los Angeles.
Strange, strange, strange. The floorboards buckle under steps not mine. A chilling draft disturbs the dust of time. I see the silver flicker in the glass, watching shadows where no figures pass. The clock is striking 13 on the wall. A phantom scent of lilies fills the hall. Cold fingers trace a line across my skin. The heavy oak doors open from within. There are no wires to pull the swinging light, no moon to pale the thick and velvet night. The portraits shift their gaze to follow me into a realm where sight is not to be. Strange, strange, strange. The laws of nature rearrange. Strange, strange, strange. The spirits calling from the range. Strange, strange, strange. The soul is trapped within the change. A sudden mist obscures the cellar stair. A humming vibrates through the static air. The ink begins to crawl across the page like captured birds escaping from a cage. Dimensions fold and thin until they break. I am the only witness left awake. Strange, strange, strange.